So I grew up in the mountains of West Virginia, where there's a trout stream pretty much around every corner. And at a young age, my dad had me out fishing every weekend, teaching me the art. And he wasn't just teaching me how to fish, he was teaching me how to fly fish. Fly fishing is a tough thing to learn, especially for a young kid. But I spent a lot of time doing it. I was very persistent about it. I fell in love, and I've continued it all throughout my life. Well, as I got older, me and my friends, we were in high school, we were fishing throughout the summertime, we were fishing on the weekends, we didn't care what the weather was, we were just out there fishing. Well, as most boys do, everything turned into a competition most of the time, and it was who can catch the most fish, who can catch the biggest fish. Well, typically, I wasn't catching the most fish, but pretty much every time I caught the biggest fish. Now, why was I catching the biggest fish? Well, we were fishing two different styles most of the time. Most of the guys were dry fly fishermen. I was a streamer fisherman. Well, we were using the same tool, a fly rod, but we were using different tactics with the tool. So a dry fly, for those of you who don't know, is a lure that's going to mimic a bug of some sort. And it's usually made out of some sort of hair or feather. Streamers are made out of hair and feathers as well, but streamers are supposed to mimic a fish. So when you're dry fly fishing, you cast out, you want the bug to float down the river, and you're waiting for a fish to be underneath it that looks up, happens to be hungry, and takes that fish, or takes that bug, excuse me. When you're streamer fishing, you're casting out and you're trying to entice a bigger fish to eat a smaller fish. It's a lot more intense. It's more violent. This is why I liked it. There was a lot more action. You weren't just sitting, waiting. You were going for it and making that fish come out. And to put it a different way, in a 2015 article titled "The Streamer Caught" by Joe Cromell, he states that the difference between a streamer junkie and a dry fly guy is that one waits for a trout to eat while the other one makes that trout eat, which is exactly true. The dry fly, you're waiting. Streamer fishing, you're making. It was a lot more fun. So I get older, get into my adult years. Where I live in West Virginia, there's trout streams right beside my house, so I got very into it. I was fishing if I had an hour to spare, I was going fishing. And I got very obsessed with trying to catch a bigger fish each time. Every time I went out, I'd catch a really nice fish, but it wasn't the fish that I wanted. I would be on the internet and I would see these pictures of these giant monster brown trout with big hooked bottom jaw. And if anyone that's into fishing, they've seen these pictures and they want to catch that trophy brown trout. Well, I caught a lot of big brown trout, but nothing of trophy size in my mind. So I started researching, trying to figure out, how can I get better at this? What can I do? Well, in a 2017 article in Fisheries Management and Ecology, it states that knowledge of predator and prey dynamics is essential to understanding a functional ecosystem. Well, that makes pretty good sense, doesn't it? How do you expect to trick and catch an animal if you don't know anything about where it lives or anything about the animal? I knew fish, I'd fished all my life, but I didn't really understand why the fish was doing what it needed to do. So, what makes a predator a predator? Excuse me. A predator is going to protect its lair. It's going to protect its territory. These huge, big brown trout, they're only there for two reasons. One is to eat and stay alive, and two is to spawn and carry on its genetics. So it's going to protect its territory from anything that comes in there. So then I started trying to mimic anything that's in my water. I needed to find out what type of prey was running through my streams. I knew for the most part, yes, there's small trout, there's going to be some minnows, there's going to be some crayfish, but what kind of minnows? What did they look like? Why were they there? What color were they? Was it a different color during a different time of year? You need to know all these things if you want to catch that big fish, because they're smart. They're old, they've been in there a long time. They're not going to eat something that they don't know really what it is. So I started making, instead of buying streamers from the store, I started making my own. And in that process, I found a guy named Kelly Gallup, and he's out of Montana. He's a world-renowned brown trout fisherman. He's a guide, he's an author, he's made videos. He's basically the guru of catching trophy brown trout. Well, I noticed Kelly Gallup was using these gigantic flies. Everything was 5 to 7 inches long. Everything I was using was like in the 3-inch range. Once again, I was catching big fish, but I thought, well, maybe I better try it. Try something bigger. All his flies were articulated, meaning they were split in the middle, so they had a lot more action in them. So when watching him, watching all of his videos, I started using a different tactic. I started catching more fish, but I still wasn't quite where I wanted to be. What is the next step? How do I go forward? Well, found an article in Field and Stream magazine by Kelly Gallup, and it was in 2013, and the article said that predator fish eat prey head first. Well, this started making sense too. After I started watching what I was doing, taking notes, I noticed if I cast downstream and a big fish had to come up and bite my bait from the back, it would swing away, and usually 99% of the time go away. They would not bite from the tail. They would always come up from the head. So I started fishing upstream instead of downstream. A lot of times when I would fish, I would go to a parking spot, I would walk 3 to 5 miles up into the woods, and then I would just start fishing back to my vehicle. It was simple, it was easy, that was just how I'd always done it. That's how my dad did it, that's how I liked fishing. Now I start at the bottom and I fish up and then I walk back. Part of that reason is because which way is a fish looking in the river? They're heading upstream, they're always facing upstream when they're swimming. They expend less energy, they don't have to barely move, they can get behind pockets, they can get behind big rocks, down to trees, and it will create an eddy current where the fish doesn't have to use any energy to move. So once I started fishing from downstream up, once again, I got better. I started catching more fish. Still wasn't catching that big monster that I wanted. So I started learning how to cast straight out and bring the bait directly at me so that I was getting more territory out of each cast. That's another thing when you're streamer fishing versus dry fly fishing. When you're dry fly fishing, you're casting out into a lane and you got this little fly and it's only got one little track that it's floating down the river. You're not covering much area. So now when I streamer fish, I usually only cast about 3 times. Every third cast, if I haven't seen anything, I move. I keep moving. I keep casting. I keep working the holes, working my way up. The deal with a predator is you're not trying to get them to come out and eat because of hunger. We're trying to get them to come out as a predatory instinct and attack something that's in their territory. So if they don't come out after about the 3rd cast, they're probably not going to come out. So anyway, you're casting out straight, you're bringing your lure straight at you. We're using a wide profile so that the fish is seeing the side. It's seeing 7 inches of bait as opposed to a 1/2 inch of bait if I'm bringing it straight down the river. I caught more fish doing this. So then the next thing you need to learn is, what about the time of year? It's very important. What happens after a rain is also very important. Brown trout can get spooked. There's large animals where I live. There's eagles flying around, there's big hawks. So if a big trout doesn't want to be seen, if it's a crystal clear water, it's a beautiful day outside, it seems like the perfect time to be going fishing. Well, not really if you want to catch that big trout. They're not going to come out if they're feeling threatened. They're not going to come out in the middle of the day. Most of the time. Now sometimes, once again, you can get lucky and you will catch a fish in these specific times of the year and what I would consider a horrible time to go fishing. But just after it rains, the water levels come up. As soon as they start dropping back down, the water has still got a little mud collar to it, but not muddy, and it's faster, it's higher. That's a perfect time to catch a big brown trout. They're not spooked. There's nothing out there trying to get them, so they can be free in the river. They can't see as well either, so if they see your big lure coming across there and it's not crystal clear, you have a better chance of catching that big fish. Also, time of year is very important. Brown trout, at least in West Virginia, and it's like this pretty much throughout the entire country, they spawn in the late fall. So what happens when these fish are spawning? There's only so many male brown trout in the river, and there's only so many female brown trout in the river. So the males get this crazy coloration to them. They become very brightly collared. They get this big hook jaw that I was talking about earlier, and that's used for fighting. So what they're doing is if there's one female in the river in their specific hole and there's 2 males, those males are going to fight each other until one gets the female and the other one has to go away. So then from then on, that male, that is his female, and he wants to keep that female until she lays her eggs and he can fertilize them. So up until that point, you can cast anything big out there and that fish is not going to let it go by them because it's intimidated and it wants it out of its territory. So if you want to catch a big male brown trout, You fish like that, you wait till spawning season, cast out, you bring it in, and it will come up and attack you, and you will catch a big collared up hook jaw male brown trout. Another thing to talk about, since you now know how to catch the big fish and time of year, is catch and release. I have practiced catch and release at least for the last 15 years. I used to keep a lot of fish and we would eat them legally. I would keep them, but I've noticed throughout my time, I take pictures of my fish. I consistently can catch the same fish multiple years, year after year. You can tell by the spots on it. I can watch its progression getting bigger. I teach my son this. If we had to go camping and we're going to eat to survive because we need food, yes, we can keep a couple fish, but we never ever keep a brown trout. And that's just my personal beliefs, but I can tell the more people that do that, the better the ecosystem is going to be, the better variety of fish we're going to have, the larger they're going to get. So I'm not preaching about catch and release, but it's a good idea, and you'll be able to catch them for generations and generations as we go by. So I hope you learned a little bit about fishing. Just remember, a big brown trout is a predator, and if you want to catch a predator, you got to exploit their predator instincts. Thank you.